Yeah, thanks, Karine. I'm going to ask you about inflation. So yesterday in the Rose Garden, the president said that when he came into office, inflation was skyrocketing, but it was 1.4% in January of 2021, and that was the 11th consecutive month at that time under 2%. So was the president misleading Americans?
Oh!
But today, data showed that inflation rose more than expected for the third straight month. So how concerned are you about the fight against inflation stalling, and do you stand by your prediction for a rate cut?
Well, I do stand by my prediction that before the year is out, there'll be a rate cut. This may delay it a month or so. I'm not sure of that. We don't know what the Fed is going to do for certain. But look, we have dramatically reduced inflation from 9% down to close to 3%. We're in a situation where we're better situated than we were when we took office, where inflation was skyrocketing.
So was the president misleading Americans?
So when the president took office, and you know this, there was a pandemic. It was closing down businesses, closing down schools, and so it was drastically.
Well, folks, you know the lying is about to begin when Karine looks down at the podium and those eyelids start a-fluttering.
Disrupting the supply chain, let's not forget about that. And so that's what was going on. And that caused inflation around the world to increase, we know that. And then further increasing inflation was the Russia's war in Ukraine. And in fact, many other countries are even worse off. Because of what we've seen with Russia's war. So the president took historic action to deal with the disruption of the supply chain. Let's not forget what he did with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve.
Oh, we haven't forgotten what Joe did with the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He drained it so he could make sure to keep gas prices down so he could get reelected, and it didn't work. Gas prices are still high, and worse than that, we no longer have a reserve in case we have an emergency.
And so we have made progress in lowering costs. We've made progress in dealing with inflation. But that's what was happening when we walked in. The pandemic, the disruption of the supply chain. All of these things were happening when the president took office.
The president didn't say the supply chain was being disrupted. He said inflation was skyrocketing.
Oh!
But that's what he was referring to, right? That's what was going on. Those were the things that were happening right before us. The pandemic, it was taking thousands of lives a day when he took office. Schools were closed, majority of schools were closed, businesses were closing, and we had a supply chain that was disrupted. And so that's what the president was speaking to and laying out, and then inflation down the road became even more, increased even more because of the war that Russia had taken on into Ukraine. Increased even more because of the war that Russia had taken on into Ukraine.
And she is really struggling keeping this lie going. He is asking about Biden's skyrocketing inflation comment, and then he took over, Biden's trying to say, and brought it down when the exact opposite happened. And this reporter, good for him, is not letting her off the hook on this, and keeps going back to that statement from Biden, and she is just trying to dance around it all she can and is failing miserably.
But the Fed supply chain measure actually went down in November at that time. So is the president being honest about inflation?
Oh!
The president has said what he said what he saw when he took office. The pandemic was happening, right? It disrupted the supply chain. You know what happens when the supply chain is disrupted. You know what that leads to. And so that's what he was speaking to. And not only that, we also saw a war in Ukraine. That Mr. Putin, an aggression that Mr. Putin was putting into Ukraine.
So was the president misleading Americans?